I always go through this because you never really know what people are thinking when they think about academic integrity. And we just want to ensure that we're all on the same page. So we can start with some brainstorming. What are some different violations of academic integrity? I think some of them are pretty straightforward. Don't cheat. Don't copy your answers when you're doing a quiz. Don't bring crib sheets like they obviously did here. But then there's some that are a little less well-known. Things like reusing your own work or paraphrasing without citing. So it's important to understand what we mean by academic integrity and ensure that we don't fall into some of the common traps, like this one. Okay, so academic integrity, more than plagiarism. So we all know that you can't copy and paste, but we often don't consider other scenarios. So let's think about some of these other scenarios. I usually ask some of the reasons why a student might act unethically in academia. It can be anything from being overwhelmed and being tired and not really having the time to get stuff done, or feeling like it's your only option. So kind of the best remedy against that is to plan ahead. And that's why we're doing the graduated assignment. So essentially the assignment that's broken down into multiple pieces, so that you don't get yourself in the scenario where you have a long paper due and you're trying to work on it the night before with nothing done. You'll already have your research question, you'll have your material, you'll have an outline. And so that's one of the reasons why I like to assign graduated assignments. All right, so these are a few scenarios that I got from a really good handbook where you can take a look. So here's the original text that you were reading, and then you wrote this text in your essay. So I guess it's worth thinking, is this ethical or not? So pause, have a think, and we'd probably say no. You'll notice that a lot of it has been just word for word copied, and that obviously is not acceptable. So a better way to do that would be to add in citations. So they talk about, Chase explains what they found. The author has also kind of modified the language and structure to fit the new context and purpose of the material. So that's a better way to go about doing it. So don't copy word for word. That one's pretty obvious. The second scenario would be if you're writing a paper from a similar topic to one that you did for another class. And you're copying and pasting selections of text from your old paper into your new one. Is that ethical? Have a think. Generally, no. I mean, you can obviously write things on similar topics, especially because now you're getting to the point where you are specializing. You're starting to maybe think about an honors thesis topic. And in some scenarios, when your professor is very much aware that you are taking material from another topic or from another class, it's okay. So I'll give you a scenario of when it might be okay. If you are in 492 and you're writing your honors thesis and you want to use, say, the lit review that you did for this class, as long as both Professor Breed and myself are aware that you're doing that, probably, and we say it's okay, then you're welcome to do that. Now, if you, for example, wrote a paper for 205, POE 205, which had the same topic, and you copy and paste directly, I would advise against doing that. I want you to be going and doing your own research and thinking about the topic anew, especially because you probably learned a lot since then, and you probably don't want to be submitting the same stuff anyway. So it's in everyone's best interest not to copy yourself. It is possible to copy yourself. The point of assignments are to assess your learning, and we can't do that if you're copying from a previous class. So we'll move on to scenario 3. All right, so here's the original text, and this is what you write. So is this ethical or not? Still some problems with that. So you'll notice that here in the previous one they had used this line, corporate mudslinging, without putting it in quotation marks. And so here they've cited Claire Murphy. They also add a citation at the end so that we know where we can access it. So you can see whenever you're kind of using a specific coined term, it's very important to cite. Most of the words are not directly taken from the original text, but even if you're paraphrasing, be sure to cite and give credit to the original author. Scenario 4. So here's the original text. Here is your text. So this might be a better way to do it, to kind of acknowledge the author in text. It was close, but not quite there. So this might be a better way to go about doing that, is to explain, as this particular author points out, and then talk about what their finding was, as opposed to just claiming it as fact and not giving the author credit. So that would be a bit of a better way to do it. Scenario 5. So you ask your friend to review an essay. They're super keen and they give you suggestions about how to improve your paper. You include these new sentences in your paper. Is this ethical or not? So this is one where there isn't, a very clear line. You obviously want to not be getting your friend to write your paper for you, but I also highly, highly encourage you to get somebody to peer review it for you. So here's a point where you need to, use those brains on your heads and think about, has this moved over to the point where this person should be receiving authorship? And if that's the case, if they're writing so much of it, or writing full sentences, then, they are an author, and I want a sole authored piece, so something written just by you. So I would encourage you to get your peers to review it, to suggest ways to clarify it, to suggest new ways of phrasing it, but it still needs to be your work. So don't fall into that trap. So a few tips for avoiding academic dishonesty. Keep track of citations and sources as you go. If you're writing things out by hand, put quotation marks and citations around the text so that you don't forget that that is a quotation and accidentally put it in, because you'll be submitting these papers online, and Turnitin.com will figure out if you have been accidentally taking quotations and using them as your own. So be sure to keep track of everything as you go. I often said, as I mentioned before, that work is usually the most sloppy when we're under a time crunch. So thankfully we will be doing a graduated assignment, which means you shouldn't get into that situation, but still think about starting early. And if you're unsure, ask or err on the side of caution. The librarians would be probably very happy to help you with that. A quick note about, because I can anticipate some questions, I don't really care what citation standard you use as long as it's standard, and as long as you use the same citation standard. So hopefully that clears up some issues with academic integrity. And then we move on to research skills, and we talk about what makes a source reliable. And of course, there's a variety of different types of sources. You probably already know this. Primary sources, which are original materials. We won't be using too much of that in our lit reviews for this class. Secondary sources, which are describing these primary sources or these primary data, especially books and articles, which we'll talk about in a second. This will be the main thing you'll be using. And then tertiary sources like index and books of abstracts, which you probably are less likely to run into. So as I mentioned, we're going to use books and articles the most. Those are the kind of two major scholarly sources. So academic books written by yours truly, and journal articles in some sort of a review that has, volume and numbers. And these are generally peer-reviewed, both of these types of work. You never really know. The author or the journal should mention whether it's been peer-reviewed, but most good journals have it peer-reviewed. So what does peer review mean? Peer review means that when I send out my work, so when I sent out this paper here, 2 blind reviewers, so 2 other professors somewhere, read it, offered really candid commentary on what was wrong with that paper. They gave me an opportunity to revise it, and then the blind reviewers took a look at it again to make sure that I didn't have any outstanding problems before it could get published. So that process takes sometimes like a good year or two to get that process done, to make sure that everything in there is solid, that the data works, that I have the theory down pat. And that's what peer review means. It means that other people have taken a look at it to make sure that it's okay. Otherwise, just anybody could publish just anything, and you never really know if it's good or not. So we look to our fellow faculty members all over the world to read and offer these blind reviews, meaning they don't know who I am and I don't know who they are, so we can be as candid as we like. So these are the two major types of sources. Books, you can get either edited volumes like this one, where every chapter is a different author, or a monograph where one author has looked up. I'm not sure if I'll talk about this later, I can't remember in the slides, but I'll just mention one way to know if you're getting like an actual scholarly source, especially for books because it's much more difficult, is to look up the author and see, are they a professor at a university, or were they a professor at a university? Do they have a PhD? So those are some ways that you can make sure that it's an actual scholarly book. So finding sources. How do you find the best books and journal articles? We'll be starting with the research question, which will be due next week, and then the first major kind of assignment will be doing this annotated bibliography. So my recommendation is to start with the course readings and take a look at their bibliography. So this is an example I gave for my 205 class. We were reading about the Canadian Senate. And essentially I went through and highlighted things that I thought I might want to come and look at. They've already done research on this topic. They know what's most important, so you might as well mine their bibliography and figure out what they are citing. Check the date of the publication. You don't want things to get too old. And you'll notice if you have an older article that you're using, this is 2010, it's not so bad, but if you're using an older article, you might need to find some more recent ones to take a look because they might not have the most up-to-date literature. Take a look at the type of publication. So a lot of these are, some of these are like papers presented at conferences. That could work, but it'd be very difficult to find. You can see here's a Royal Commission report. That's not really a scholarly source. It's more of a, almost closer to a primary source. So take a look for that. And then if you're wondering, is this a good publication or not, take a look at whether it's from a university press or a peer-reviewed journal. So here, Ohio University Press. So usually if it's a university press, it tends to be okay. And then journals, Canadian Parliamentary Review is okay, kind of. It's not quite a scholarly journal, but you could take a look and see what their process is. Do they have blind review or not? That's how you know you get the good stuff. So then you go find these, then you mine their bibliographies. And that's the best way. I very rarely, if ever, just kind of go into Google Scholar and search keywords. Instead, I'm always looking at what other people have done because they know what's the good stuff and what's not. So that's how I'd highly recommend that you find stuff. Because we do have some older publications in the syllabus, if you are having a hard time, I can definitely recommend a couple articles to get you started. So just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to do that. And I likely will send you some suggestions when I give you comments back on your research question. So how do you find them? RMC Library, go talk to the librarians, or the Queen's Library is always a bit of a better shot to have something, especially right now because the RMC Library is under construction right now. And sometimes, if you're having a hard time finding something, Google it with the PDF after, and you never know, you might find it. You actually need to have 10. This was left over from my 205 class. So repeat the process until you have enough scholarly sources. For the annotation, when you get to that, you're essentially going to put the citation of the book or the article or whatever it is and explain what kind of methodology they use, what question they're trying to deal with, how you're going to use it for your essay, what sort of evidence they present. I'd really encourage you to use that reading template that I handed out in the first class as a good way to go through those 10 sources that you're going to find. That's a good way to organize your thoughts and pull them all into just a one-paragraph annotation. And that would be it. So I'm going to turn off the camera for now and shoot me an email if you have any questions about that, and then we'll move on to the political parties.